The auction platform smelled like old wood and older shame. Delilah Monroe stood there in a dress that had seen better years, her arms wrapped around herself, not for warmth, but for the illusion of protection. The fabric was thin, worn at the elbows, patched badly at the hem. Her shoes had been taken 3 days ago by the boarding house keeper, payment for a debt Delilah couldn't settle. So she stood barefoot on wood that had been scrubbed clean of blood from the livestock sales the day before. February in Montana Territory didn't care about dignity. The wind came down from the mountains with teeth, and it bit through everything: wood, cloth, skin, spirit. Delilah's feet had gone from painful to numb about an hour ago. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. Couldn't feel much of anything, really, except the weight of every eye in Jasper Hollow boring into her like she was something they'd already discarded but couldn't stop looking at. The auctioneer was a man named Virgil Cass, fat and red-faced, with a voice that carried over crowds because he'd spent 30 years selling things that didn't want to be sold. He stood beside her now, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath and the sweat under his wool coat. "Now, gentlemen," Virgil called out, his voice booming across the town square. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this here is damaged goods." Delilah felt something inside her chest crack a little more. Not break. It had broken months ago. This was just the sound of pieces settling into new, uglier shapes. "And you'd be right," Virgil continued, like he was commenting on a mare with a bad leg. "Miss Monroe here, she's had what we might call a complicated year. Husband died. Debts piled up. Made some choices that, well," he gestured vaguely at her, as if her entire existence explained itself. "But she's healthy, she can cook, clean, mend. She's got all her teeth." Someone in the crowd laughed. Delilah didn't look to see who. "She's literate, too," Virgil added, like it was a curiosity. "Reads and writes better than most. Could teach children, if anyone was fool enough to let her near them." More laughter. Delilah kept her eyes on the horizon, on the line where the gray sky met the white mountains. If she looked at the crowd, she'd see faces she knew. People who'd called her Mrs. Monroe once, who'd tipped their hats, who'd bought bread from her when she still had a kitchen and a life that made sense. "Let's start the bidding at $20, Virgil announced. Silence. Delilah had known it would be silent. She'd prepared herself for it. But preparation didn't make it easier. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating, and she felt every second of it like a hand around her throat. $20, Virgil repeated, his voice losing some of its confidence. "Come now, gentlemen, that's a bargain for a woman who can work." Nothing. Just the wind and the creak of the platform under her feet and the sound of someone spitting tobacco into the frozen dirt. 15, Virgil said. Delilah closed her eyes. She'd been worth something once. When Daniel Monroe had married her 5 years ago, her father had provided a dowry of $200, a house, and 6 acres of good land. Daniel had looked at her like she was a prize he couldn't believe he'd won. He'd been kind in his way, distant but kind. Then the fever took him, along with half the town, and suddenly Delilah was a widow with debts she didn't know existed and creditors who didn't care that she was grieving. $10, Virgil said, and now there was desperation creeping into his voice. This was the bottom. This was what happened when you were a woman alone with no family, no money, no protection. The town had been patient at first. Then they'd been pitying. Then they'd been irritated. And then they'd stopped seeing her as a person at all. $10 for a working woman, Virgil repeated. She won't eat much. Won't cause trouble. Delilah opened her eyes and made herself look at the crowd. There were maybe 40 people gathered, men mostly, because women didn't attend these kinds of sales unless they were selling preserves or quilts. She recognized most of them. There was Samuel Garrett, who owned the general store. He'd refused her credit 2 months ago. There was Thomas Brennan, who'd propositioned her outside the church, thinking a widow was the same as a whore. There was... Her breath caught. There near the back, standing apart from the others, Boaz Creed. She'd seen him exactly twice before. Once, 6 months ago, when he'd come into town for supplies and hadn't spoken to anyone. And once, 3 months ago, when he'd been at the land office doing business she didn't know or care about. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that looked like he'd forgotten what a razor was. He wore a heavy coat that had seen hard use, boots that were scuffed and stained, and a hat pulled low enough that his eyes were shadowed. People said he'd bought land up in the high country. People said he'd been a soldier or a criminal or both. People said he didn't talk to anyone and didn't want anyone talking to him. People said a lot of things, and Delilah had learned that most of what people said was horse shit. "All right," Virgil said, and his voice had gone flat now, resigned. $5. $5 and she's yours. That's less than a good dog. Delilah felt her fingernails dig into her palms. Less than a good dog. She'd taught herself not to cry anymore, but the urge was there, sitting in her throat like a stone. $5, Virgil repeated. Anyone? A man near the front, she didn't know his name, but she knew his type, rough-handed and mean-eyed, spoke up. She know how to keep her mouth shut? Virgil seized on it like a drowning man grabbing a rope. Quiet as a church mouse when she needs to be, I'm sure. "I'll give you $2, the man said, and that's generous considering. Delilah's stomach turned. $2. That was what she'd come to. $2 and the assumption that she'd be quiet while whatever happened, happened. "Now, friend," Virgil started, trying to sound jovial and failing, $2 is an insult to $17.50. The voice came from the back, deep, rough, like it wasn't used often. Every head turned. Boaz Creed hadn't moved. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, face mostly hidden under that hat. But he'd spoken, and his voice carried. Virgil blinked. "I'm sorry, did you—" $17.50, Boaz repeated, louder this time. "That's my offer." The crowd stirred, uneasy. Samuel Garrett muttered something to the man beside him. Thomas Brennan was staring at Boaz like he was trying to figure out if this was a joke. Virgil recovered fast. $17.50. Now, that's more like it. Do I hear 18? Silence. $18, anyone? Nothing. The rough-handed man who'd offered $2 was scowling, but he didn't raise his bid. Nobody did. They all just stared at Boaz Creed like he'd done something incomprehensible. "Going once," Virgil called out, his voice picking up speed now, eager to close the deal before anyone changed their mind. "Going twice? Wait." Another voice. Delilah's blood went cold. Marcus Tully stepped forward from the crowd. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-armed, with a face that always looked like it was considering violence. He owned a lumber operation up north and had a reputation for working his men until they broke. He also had a reputation for other things. "I'll bid 20, Marcus said. Delilah felt her knees go weak. "No, not him. Anyone but him." Virgil's eyes lit up. $20. Now we're talking. Do I hear 25? Boaz Creed didn't hesitate. 25. Marcus turned, looked at Boaz for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. 30. 35, Boaz said. The crowd was fully invested now, leaning in, watching this like it was a prize fight. Delilah stood frozen, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. 40, Marcus said. 45. Marcus's smile faded. You even know what you're bidding on, Creed? Boaz didn't answer. Because I know exactly what she is, Marcus continued, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. She's a widow who couldn't pay her debts. She's been living in that boarding house doing whatever Sarah Kemper tells her to do, and we all know what that means. Delilah felt the shame wash over her like scalding water. Sarah Kemper ran the boarding house, and yes, Delilah had worked there. Cleaning rooms, washing linens, cooking meals. But Sarah also rented rooms by the hour to men who didn't care what the women's names were. And the line between respectable work and the other kind had gotten blurry in people's minds. $50, Boaz said, cutting through Marcus's speech. Marcus's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. $50, Boaz repeated. Do I need to say it again? Virgil jumped in before things could get uglier. $50, an excellent bid. Do I hear 55? Marcus stared at Boaz for another few seconds, then spat into the dirt. She ain't worth 50 cents, let alone $50. You want her that bad, Creed? You can have her. He turned and pushed back through the crowd. Virgil waited, looking around hopefully, but nobody else spoke up. Going once, going twice, sold. To Mr. Creed for $50. There was scattered applause, thin and awkward. Delilah stood there, her mind spinning. $50. Boaz Creed had just paid $50 for her. She didn't know what that meant. Didn't know if it was better or worse than Marcus Tully. Boaz walked forward through the crowd. People moved aside for him, not out of respect but out of uncertainty. He climbed the steps to the platform, pulled a leather pouch from inside his coat, and counted out the money into Virgil's waiting hand. "Pleasure doing business," Virgil said, all smiles now that he had cash in his palm. Boaz ignored him. He turned to Delilah, and for the first time she got a clear look at his face. He was younger than she'd thought. Maybe 35, maybe less. His eyes were dark, brown or maybe dark gray, she couldn't tell in this light. There was a scar running through his left eyebrow, old and faded. His expression was unreadable. Not cruel, not kind, just blank. "You got a coat?" he asked. His voice was quieter up close, but it still had that rough edge, like gravel underfoot. Delilah shook her head. She'd pawned her good coat weeks ago. Boaz pulled off his own coat and held it out to her. She stared at it. "It's cold," he said, like that explained everything. Slowly she took the coat. It was heavy, lined with wool, and it smelled like wood smoke and leather and something else she couldn't identify. She put it on, and it swallowed her. The sleeves hung past her hands. The hem reached her knees. "Come on," Boaz said. He walked down the platform steps without looking back. Delilah hesitated for just a moment, glancing at the crowd one last time. They were already dispersing, already moving on. Samuel Garrett was heading back to his store. Thomas Brennan was laughing with someone about something. The rough-handed man who'd bid $2 was nowhere to be seen. Just like that, she'd been sold and forgotten. Delilah followed Boaz Creed down the steps and across the square. He had a horse tied up near the edge of town, a big roan gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm temperament. There was a pack mule beside it, loaded with supplies. Boaz untied the horse, then looked at Delilah. "You ride?" "Not well," she admitted. He nodded, like he'd expected that. He swung himself up into the saddle with the easy grace of someone who'd spent half his life on horseback, then reached down. "Give me your hand." Delilah looked at his outstretched hand, calloused, scarred across the knuckles, broad-palmed. A working man's hand. She took it. He pulled her up behind him like she weighed nothing. "Hold on," he said. She wrapped her arms around his waist because there was nowhere else to hold. He was solid, warm through the layers of clothing. She could feel his breathing, steady and even. Boaz clicked his tongue, and the horse started moving. The mule followed without needing to be led. They rode out of Jasper Hollow, heading north, and Delilah didn't look back. The first hour passed in silence. Delilah kept waiting for Boaz to say something, to explain what he wanted from her, to lay out expectations, to make some comment about the $50 he'd just spent. But he didn't speak. He just rode, following a trail that led up into the foothills, away from the valley where Jasper Hollow sat. The cold was brutal. Even with his coat, Delilah felt it seeping into her bones. Her feet were still bare, pressed against the horse's warm side, and every gust of wind made her curl in tighter behind Boaz's back. After the second hour, the trail got steeper. They were climbing now into country Delilah had never seen. The valley fell away behind them, and the land opened up into something wilder. Pine forest dark and dense, rocky outcrops jutting from the hillsides, snow covering everything in a thick white blanket that looked pristine until you noticed the animal tracks cutting through it. "Where are we going?" Delilah finally asked. Her voice came out hoarse from disuse and cold. "My ranch," Boaz said. That was it. 2 words. No elaboration. Delilah waited, but he didn't add anything else. "How far?" She tried. "Another hour. 3 hours total from town. 3 hours into backcountry that most people avoided." Delilah had heard about the high country, how it was harder land, meaner land, land that didn't forgive mistakes. You had to be tough or crazy to try ranching up here. She was starting to suspect Boaz Creed might be both. They passed through a stand of aspens, the white bark stark against the snow, and Delilah caught sight of something moving in the trees. She tensed. "Elk," Boaz said, like he'd felt her reaction. "Whole herd of them up here. They come down when the snow gets too deep higher up." "Are they dangerous?" "Not unless you're stupid about it." That was the longest exchange they'd had. The sun was starting to sink toward the western peaks when they finally crested a ridge, and Delilah saw it, Boaz Creed's ranch. It wasn't much. A cabin, decent-sized but rough, built from logs that looked hand-cut and fitted together with more practicality than artistry. A barn that had seen better days but was still standing. A few outbuildings, including what looked like a smokehouse and a root cellar. A corral that was empty right now, the fence posts leaning at angles that suggested they'd been put up in a hurry and never properly fixed. But the land was something else. The ranch sat in a natural bowl between two ridges, sheltered from the worst of the wind. There was a creek running through it, not frozen over completely, the water still moving under a skin of ice. Meadow grass poked up through the snow in places, brown but stubborn. Beyond the cabin, the forest pressed in close, dark and thick. It was isolated, completely, utterly isolated. Delilah felt a flutter of panic in her chest. Boaz rode straight to the barn, dismounted, and held up his arms. Delilah slid down awkwardly, her legs cramping from 3 hours on horseback. When her bare feet hit the snow-covered ground, she gasped. Boaz noticed. He looked down at her feet, then at her face, then away. "Get inside. I'll deal with the animals." "I can help," Delilah said automatically. "You're barefoot. I know that, but get inside," Boaz repeated. It wasn't quite an order, but it wasn't a suggestion either. Delilah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She was freezing, exhausted, and standing in snow that was already soaking into the hem of the dress under his coat. She didn't have the energy to fight about helping with chores. She limped toward the cabin. The door wasn't locked. It opened with a push, and Delilah stepped into darkness that smelled like cold ash and old coffee. She stood there for a moment, letting her eyes adjust. The cabin was one big room with a loft overhead. There was a fireplace on the far wall, a wood stove near what passed for a kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, a couple of shelves holding supplies and books. Books, she noticed with surprise, and a bed in the corner. One bed. Delilah's stomach knotted. She'd known this was coming, had known it the moment Boaz bid on her. You didn't pay $50 for a woman and expect her to sleep in the barn. She made herself breathe slowly. She'd survived worse than this. She'd survived Daniel's awkward, apologetic attempts at intimacy. She'd survived the men who'd propositioned her after he died, thinking her desperation made her available. She'd survived Thomas Brennan cornering her behind the church and putting his hands on her before she'd managed to knee him hard enough to get away. She could survive Boaz's creed. The door opened behind her. Boaz came in carrying a lamp already lit. He set it on the table and the warm glow pushed back the darkness. "Fireplace needs cleaning out," he said, like he was talking to himself. "Haven't been here in 4 days." He moved to the fireplace, knelt down, and started pulling out old ash with his bare hands, dumping it into a bucket. Then he built a new fire with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Within minutes, flames were crackling, and heat started to fill the room. Delilah stood near the door, still wearing his coat, not sure what to do with herself. Boaz stood up, brushing ash off his hands. He looked at her for a moment, that unreadable expression back on his face. "You hungry?" he asked. "I don't know," Delilah said honestly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Yesterday, maybe. Thin soup at the boarding house. Boaz went to the shelves and started pulling down supplies. Dried meat, beans in a jar, flour, salt. He moved around the small kitchen area with practiced ease, and Delilah realized he'd been living alone out here long enough that cooking for himself was routine. "Sit down," he said, nodding toward the table. Delilah didn't move. "I can cook." "I know." "Then let me—" "Sit down," Boaz repeated, and this time there was something in his voice. Not anger, not impatience, just a kind of firm finality that made argument feel pointless. Delilah sat. She watched him work. He put beans on to soak, sliced the dried meat, mixed up biscuit dough with quick, competent movements. He didn't talk, didn't hum, didn't make any of the small sounds people usually made when they were comfortable. He just worked in silence, and Delilah realized this was normal for him. This quiet, this solitude. "Why did you buy me?" The question came out before she could stop it. Boaz didn't turn around. He was checking the fire under the beans. "Needed help." "You could have hired someone." "Tried that. Didn't work out. So you bought me instead." He did turn then, and his dark eyes met hers. "You want to be back in Jasper Hollow?" Delilah's throat tightened. "No." "Then don't complicate it." He went back to cooking. Delilah pulled his coat tighter around herself. The fire was warming the room now, taking the edge off the cold. But she still felt frozen from the inside out. Don't complicate it. Like she was a simple transaction. Like she should be grateful and quiet and not ask questions. Maybe she should be. Boaz finished cooking and put a plate in front of her. Beans, fried meat, a biscuit that was slightly lopsided but smelled like heaven. He put another plate across from her and sat down. They ate in silence. The food was plain but good. Real food, hot food, more than Delilah had eaten in one sitting in weeks. She forced herself to eat slowly, not to shovel it down like a starving animal, even though that's what she felt like. When she finished, Boaz took her plate without comment and washed both plates in a basin of water he'd heated on the stove. Then he dried them and put them back on the shelf. "You can have the bed," he said. Delilah blinked. "What?" "The bed." He nodded toward the corner. "You can have it." "Where will you sleep?" "Loft?" She looked up. The loft was barely big enough for a person to lie down. It was probably cold up there, away from the fire. "I don't need—" she started. "Not negotiating," Boaz said. He was already climbing the ladder to the loft. He disappeared up there, and she heard him moving around, settling in. Delilah sat at the table, staring at the fire, trying to make sense of what was happening. He'd given her his coat, given her food, given her the bed. And he hadn't touched her, hadn't demanded anything, hadn't even looked at her the way men usually looked at women they'd bought. She didn't know what to do with that. Eventually, exhaustion won. She went to the bed, just a simple frame with a straw mattress and wool blankets, and lay down fully clothed, still wrapped in Boaz's coat. The bed smelled like him, wood smoke and leather and that unidentifiable something else. She closed her eyes and waited for sleep, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She kept thinking about the auction platform, about Marcus Tully's smile, about the silence before Boaz had bid, about the fact that she was worth $17.50. Above her, she heard Boaz shift in the loft, heard his breathing even out as he fell asleep. Delilah lay there in the darkness, listening to the fire crack and pop, and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. She woke to the smell of coffee and the gray light of dawn. Boaz was already up, dressed, standing by the stove. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought one to her without speaking. Delilah sat up, took the cup. The coffee was strong and bitter and perfect. "There's bread," Boaz said, nodding toward the table, "and butter in the cold box outside. What time is it?" "Early." He pulled on his coat. A different coat, she realized. He must have multiple. "I've got work to do. You can stay inside if you want, or you can look around. There's boots by the door that might fit, and clothes in the trunk at the foot of the bed." Delilah's eyebrows went up. "Clothes? Belong to my sister. She won't be needing them." The way he said it, flat, final, told Delilah not to ask. "I'll be back at midday," Boaz continued. "Don't wander into the forest. Easy to get lost." Then he left. Delilah sat there holding her coffee, listening to his footsteps crunch through the snow outside, listening to the barn door open and close. She was alone, completely alone, for the first time in months. She drank her coffee slowly, then got up and went to the trunk. Inside were clothes, a dress, a skirt, 2 shirts, stockings, undergarments. They were worn but clean, and they looked like they'd fit reasonably well. At the bottom of the trunk was something else. A book. A journal, actually, bound in leather. Delilah picked it up, opened it. The handwriting inside was small, neat, feminine. August 12th, 1871. "Boaz says we can make this work, says the land is hard but fair. I want to believe him. I want to believe we can build something here that lasts." Delilah closed the journal quickly, feeling like she'd trespassed. She put on the clothes, the skirt and one of the shirts, stockings that were thick and warm. Then she tried the boots. They were a little big, but with the thick stockings they worked. She felt almost human again. Delilah spent the morning exploring the cabin. There wasn't much to see, but what was there told her things about Boaz's creed. The books on the shelf were worn from reading, volumes on animal husbandry, carpentry, medicine. There was a Bible, but it looked unread, the pages stiff. There were maps tacked to the wall, hand-drawn, showing the ranch and the surrounding land. There was a rifle above the door, clean and oiled. There was a set of carpentry tools in the corner, well maintained. This was a man who valued practical knowledge, who read, who prepared for problems before they happened. This was also a man who lived alone. At midday, Boaz came back. He looked at her in the new clothes, nodded once, then went to wash his hands. "You eat?" he asked. "Not yet." He made them lunch, more beans, more bread. They ate in silence again. Afterward, he went back outside. Delilah watched him through the window. He was working on the corral fence, replacing posts that had rotted through. His movements were methodical, efficient. He didn't waste motion. She made a decision. Delilah put on the two big boots and Boaz's sister's coat, which she'd found hanging on a peg, and went outside. Boaz looked up when she approached. "Thought you were staying inside." "I can help," Delilah said. "With what?" "Whatever needs doing." Boaz studied her for a moment. "You know anything about fence posts?" "I can learn." Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, but close. "All right. Hold this steady." He handed her a post and she held it while he packed dirt and rocks around the base. They worked together in silence, and Delilah found a strange comfort in it. There was something honest about physical labor, something that made sense in a way words didn't. They worked until the sun started to sink. "That's enough," Boaz said finally. "Getting too cold." They went back inside. Boaz made dinner, venison this time, with potatoes and carrots he pulled from the root cellar. The smell made Delilah's mouth water. While it cooked, Boaz spoke suddenly. "You don't have to work. That's not why I—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider. "You don't owe me anything." Delilah looked at him. "You paid $50 for me. That's not—" He stopped again, frustrated. "That money's gone. It doesn't mean anything now. It means something to me. It shouldn't, but it does." They stared at each other across the small cabin. The venison hissed in the pan. The fire crackled. Boaz looked away first. "Do what you want, but you don't owe me anything. Understand?" Delilah didn't answer. They ate dinner in silence. That night, Delilah lay in the bed again, and Boaz climbed to the loft again, and the pattern repeated itself. And the next day, and the day after that. A week passed like that. Then 2. The routine settled in, Boaz working, Delilah finding ways to help despite his protests, meals shared in silence, nights spent apart. She learned things about him without him telling her. He woke before dawn every day. He was stronger than he looked, capable of lifting things that should have taken 2 men. He was patient with the animals, gentle, even. He read every night before sleeping, the lamplight from the loft casting shadows on the cabin walls. He never touched her, never even came close. And Delilah didn't know what to make of that. In Jasper Hollow, she'd been worth $17.50. Here, in this isolated cabin with this silent man, she didn't know what she was worth. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure that was the right question to be asking. 3 weeks into her new life, Delilah woke to silence. Not the usual silence, Boaz moving around downstairs, coffee brewing, the stove door clanging shut. This was complete silence, the kind that made her sit up in bed and listen harder, straining for any sound that would tell her she wasn't alone in the cabin. Nothing. She got out of bed, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and climbed down. The fire had burned low, just embers glowing in the hearth. No fresh wood added, no coffee on the stove. Boaz's coat was gone from the peg. Delilah went to the window and looked out. Snow had fallen during the night, heavy and thick, covering everything in fresh white. The world looked clean and untouched, like someone had erased all the marks of living. Then she saw him. Boaz was out by the barn, but he wasn't working. He was just standing there, facing east toward the rising sun, completely still. His breath came out in clouds that hung in the frozen air. He stood like that for maybe 5 minutes, not moving, and Delilah found herself holding her own breath, watching him. Finally, he turned and went into the barn. Delilah let out her breath and stepped back from the window. She dressed quickly, built up the fire, and started the coffee. By the time Boaz came back inside, she had breakfast ready, fried potatoes and the last of the eggs from the cold box. He stopped in the doorway, looked at the table, then at her. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know." He took off his coat, washed his hands, sat down. They ate without talking, the same as always. But Delilah kept thinking about the way he'd stood outside, so still, facing the sunrise like he was waiting for something that never came. After breakfast, Boaz pushed back from the table. "I'm going into town tomorrow. Need supplies before the next storm hits." Delilah's stomach tightened. "Jasper Hollow? Only town there is. Do you want me to—" She stopped, not sure what she was offering. To come with him? To stay hidden? "You're coming," Boaz said. "Need to get you proper boots. Those are too big and you'll break an ankle in them come spring when the ground gets soft." "I'm fine with these." "You're not fine. You're managing. There's a difference." He stood up. "We'll leave early. Be back before dark if the weather holds." That night, Delilah lay awake longer than usual. The thought of going back to Jasper Hollow made her feel sick. She'd spent 3 weeks pretending that place didn't exist, that the auction platform and the staring faces and the silence before Boaz bid were all just a bad dream she'd woken from. But tomorrow she'd have to see it again. See the people who'd watched her being sold. See the buildings where she'd once had a life that made sense. She heard Boaz shift in the loft above her, heard him clear his throat quietly. "You awake?" he asked. Delilah was so surprised she didn't answer at first. He never spoke after they'd gone to bed. Never. "Yes," she said finally. A pause. Then, "We don't have to go. I can make do with what we've got." "You said you need supplies. I can stretch things." Delilah stared up at the dark ceiling. "Why are you asking?" Another pause, longer this time. "Because you've been different since I told you. Quieter." "I'm always quiet." "Quieter than that." She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know what it meant that he'd noticed. "I'm fine," she said. "We'll go." "All right." That was it. He didn't say anything else, and eventually Delilah heard his breathing even out into sleep. But she lay awake until dawn, watching the first gray light creep across the cabin walls. They left just after sunrise. Boaz saddled the roan and helped Delilah up behind him without comment. The pack mule was loaded light. They'd be bringing supplies back, so there was space for whatever Boaz needed to buy. The ride down to Jasper Hollow took 2.5 hours in good weather. Today, with fresh snow making the trail uncertain in places, it took closer to 3. Delilah held on to Boaz's coat and tried not to think about what was waiting at the other end. When they crested the last ridge and the valley opened up below them, Delilah saw Jasper Hollow spread out like it had been dropped there by accident. Smoke rose from chimneys. The church steeple pointed up at the gray sky. The main street cut through the center of town, lined with buildings that all looked the same. Weathered wood, false fronts, signs that needed repainting. "We'll be quick," Boaz said. "In and out." They rode down into town just before noon. A few people were out despite the cold. Women heading to the general store, men standing outside the saloon even though it was too early for drinking, a group of children throwing snowballs near the schoolhouse. Everyone stopped and stared when they saw Boaz and Delilah. Boaz ignored them. He rode straight to the general store and dismounted. He helped Delilah down and she felt every eye on her. Felt them taking in the fact that she was still with him, still alive, still wearing clothes that fit. The door to the general store opened and Samuel Garrett stepped out. He was a thin man with a narrow face and eyes that always looked suspicious. He'd run the store for 20 years and treated it like his personal kingdom. "Creed," he said, nodding. "Garrett." Boaz tied the horse to the rail. "Need to stock up. You got time?" "Always got time for paying customers." Samuel's eyes flicked to Delilah. "Mrs. Monroe. Didn't expect to see you again." The name hit Delilah like a slap. Mrs. Monroe. That's who she'd been. That's who she wasn't anymore. "It's just Delilah," she said quietly. Samuel's eyebrows went up. "That's so." He looked at Boaz. "She working out for you?" "That's not your business," Boaz said. His voice was flat, but there was an edge to it that made Samuel take a step back. "Didn't mean anything by it, just making conversation. Make it about something else." Samuel's face tightened, but he nodded. "Come on inside. Let's see what you need." The general store was warm and smelled like coffee and sawdust and the soap Samuel made in the back room. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from flour and sugar to rope and nails. There were barrels of dried beans and apples, crates of canned goods, bolts of fabric stacked in the corner. Boaz pulled a list from his pocket and started going through it with Samuel. Delilah stood near the door, trying to be invisible. The door opened behind her and two women walked in. Delilah recognized them immediately, Martha Yates and her daughter Catherine. Martha was in her 50s, round-faced and sharp-tongued. Catherine was 23, pretty in a bland way, engaged to the deputy. They saw Delilah and stopped. "Well," Martha said, "look who decided to show her face." Delilah didn't respond. "I heard Creed bought you," Martha continued. "Paid good money, too. Must be working you hard to get his value back." "Leave her alone, Mama," Catherine said quietly. "I'm just stating facts." Martha moved closer, her eyes scanning Delilah from head to foot. "You look better than you did. Filled out some. Guess he's feeding you at least." "Mama? What? She's standing right here. She can speak for herself." Martha looked at Delilah expectantly. "Can't you?" Delilah met her eyes. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me if that man is treating you right. Because if he's not, there are people in this town who would—" "Who would what?" Delilah cut her off. "Who would help me? The same people who stood there and watched me get sold? The same people who crossed the street to avoid me when my husband died and left me with nothing?" Martha's face flushed. "Now you listen here." "No!" Delilah's voice was louder than she'd intended, and Samuel and Boaz both looked over. "You don't get to pretend you care. You don't get to act like you're concerned. You didn't care when I was starving. You didn't care when I had nowhere to go. You only care now because you're nosy and bored." "How dare you speak to me like that?" Martha sputtered. "Easily," Delilah said, "because I don't owe you anything. Not respect, not explanations, not a single damn word." Catherine was staring at her with wide eyes. Samuel had stopped mid-sentence, and Boaz was watching with that unreadable expression, his hand still resting on a sack of flour. Martha drew herself up. "You've become common, crude. I suppose that's what happens when you live like an animal up in those hills." Delilah felt something snap inside her. She took a step toward Martha, and the older woman actually backed up. "I live in a warm cabin with food and a roof that doesn't leak," Delilah said quietly. "I sleep in a real bed. I wear clothes that fit. I don't have to beg or borrow or sell myself for scraps. So if that makes me common, then fine. I'm common. I'm crude. And I'm happier than I ever was pretending to be respectable in this miserable town." "Well, I never—" Martha started. "Yes, you did," Delilah said. "You did all the time. You just didn't get called on it before." She turned and walked out of the store. The cold air hit her face like a bucket of water. Delilah stood on the wooden sidewalk, shaking, not from cold, but from anger and something else she couldn't name. She'd never talked to anyone like that before, never raised her voice, never pushed back, never told anyone what she really thought. It felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The store door opened behind her. Boaz came out carrying 2 large sacks. He loaded them onto the mule without speaking, then came back and stood beside her. "You all right?" he asked. "I don't know." He nodded, like that was a reasonable answer. "Need to go to the cobbler, get you those boots." They walked down the street together. People stared, but Delilah didn't look at them. She kept her eyes forward, her chin up. The cobbler's shop was small and cluttered, smelling like leather and oil. The cobbler himself was an old man named Heinrich, German-born, with hands gnarled from 60 years of shoemaking. "Boaz," he said when they walked in. His eyes moved to Delilah. "And company." "She needs boots," Boaz said. "Good ones, for winter and work." Heinrich gestured for Delilah to sit. He measured her feet carefully, making notes on a scrap of paper. "I have a pair that might fit. Custom order that was never picked up. Let me check." He disappeared into the back room. Delilah and Boaz sat in silence. Through the window, she could see people walking past, slowing down to look in at them. "Thank you," Delilah said quietly. "For what?" "For the boots. For bringing me here even though you knew it would be—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. "Hard," Boaz supplied. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You handled yourself back there, with Martha Yates." "I shouldn't have lost my temper." "Why not? She was out of line." "So was I." "No," Boaz said. "You weren't." He looked at her, and his dark eyes were serious. "You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to push back. Don't let anyone tell you different. Before Delilah could respond, Heinrich came back carrying a pair of boots. They were beautiful, dark leather, well-stitched, with good thick soles. Try these, he said. Delilah pulled them on. They fit almost perfectly, just a little room in the toes for thick socks. I'll take them, Boaz said. That'll be $4, Heinrich said. Boaz paid without hesitation. $4 for boots. Delilah felt something twist in her chest. They left the cobbler's shop and headed back toward the general store to finish loading supplies. But as they passed the saloon, a voice called out, "Creed, hold up!" Delilah's blood went cold. She knew that voice. Marcus Tully stepped out of the saloon, a glass of whiskey in one hand. He looked the same as he had at the auction, big, broad, mean. Two other men came out behind him, friends or employees, Delilah couldn't tell which. Boaz stopped. "Tully, heard you were in town." Marcus took a drink, his eyes moving to Delilah. "Brought your purchase with you, I see." "Keep walking," Boaz said quietly to Delilah. "I'm talking to you, Creed," Marcus said, louder now. People were stopping, gathering, always hungry for a show. Boaz turned. "Then talk." Marcus smiled. "I wanted to know if you're happy with your investment, if she's worth what you paid." "That's not your concern." "See, I think it is. Because I was willing to go higher at that auction, would have kept bidding if I'd known she was worth $50 to someone." "But you didn't," Boaz said. "So this conversation is pointless. I'm just saying, if you ever get tired of her, I'd be willing to take her off your hands. Maybe for a discount, since she's used now." Boaz went very still. It was a different kind of stillness than his usual quiet. This was the stillness of a predator about to strike. "You got something to say to her," Boaz said, his voice low and dangerous. "You say it to her face. Not to me. She's standing right here." Marcus looked surprised. Then he laughed. "What, you want me to ask her permission? She's not—" "She's a person," Boaz cut him off. "And you'll treat her like one, or you and I are going to have a problem." The crowd had grown now. Delilah could see faces she recognized. Samuel Garrett in the doorway of his store, Martha Yates and her daughter, the deputy whose name she couldn't remember. Marcus took a step forward. "You threatening me, Creed?" "Stating a fact." "Over some whore you bought at auction?" Boaz moved so fast, Delilah almost didn't see it. One moment he was standing still, the next his fist connected with Marcus's jaw with a sound like an axe hitting wood. Marcus went down hard, his glass shattering on the frozen ground. The two men behind Marcus started forward, but Boaz turned on them with such cold fury in his eyes that they stopped. "Anyone else?" Boaz asked quietly. Nobody moved. Marcus was on the ground, blood running from his split lip. He pushed himself up on one elbow, spat red into the snow. "You're dead," he said. "You hear me, Creed? You're dead." "Get up and try," Boaz said. But Marcus didn't get up. He just sat there in the snow, bleeding and humiliated, while the whole town watched. Boaz turned to Delilah. "We're leaving." They walked back to the general store. Samuel had their supplies ready. He must have rushed to pack everything while the fight was happening. Boaz paid, loaded the mule, and helped Delilah onto the horse without saying a word. They rode out of Jasper Hollow with everyone staring. The ride back was silent for the first hour. Delilah held on to Boaz's coat and tried to process what had happened. He'd hit Marcus Tully, had knocked him down in front of the whole town, had done it because Marcus called her a whore. Nobody had ever defended her before. When they were halfway home, Boaz spoke. "I shouldn't have done that." "What?" "Hit him. I should have walked away. He deserved it." "That's not the point. Now he'll come after me, maybe after you." "He was going to do that anyway," Delilah said. "Men like that don't need a reason. They just need an excuse." Boaz didn't respond. They rode in silence for another mile. Then Delilah said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For hitting him." Boaz made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You're welcome." When they got back to the ranch, the sun was already setting. They unloaded the supplies together, working quickly in the fading light. Boaz took care of the animals while Delilah started dinner. As she worked, she kept thinking about what Martha Yates had said, about whether Boaz was treating her right, about whether there were people who would help. The truth was, Boaz treated her better than anyone else ever had. He gave her space, gave her food, gave her work that made her feel useful. He didn't demand anything, didn't take anything, just let her exist. That should have been a low bar to clear. The fact that it felt like such a high one said more about her life before than anything else could. Boaz came in while she was frying potatoes. He washed up, then came to stand beside her at the stove. "Move over," he said. "I'll finish that. You set the table." "I can do both." "I know, but you don't have to." They worked side by side in the small kitchen space, not talking, just moving around each other with the ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. Delilah set out plates and forks. Boaz finished the potatoes and pulled out the dried venison. They sat down and ate. Halfway through the meal, Boaz said, "I need to tell you something." Delilah looked up. "My sister," he started, then stopped, cleared his throat, started again. "The clothes you're wearing, the journal you found, that was all hers." "I'm sorry," Delilah said. "I shouldn't have—" "No, it's fine. I want you to know." He pushed food around on his plate. "Her name was Rachel. She was 2 years younger than me. When our parents died, it was just us. We came out here together, built this place together." Delilah waited. She could see how hard this was for him. "She got sick 3 winters ago. Fever. I rode to town for medicine, but the snow was bad and it took too long. By the time I got back—" His voice cracked slightly. "She was already gone. Boaz, I buried her up on the ridge, where she can see the sunrise." He looked at Delilah, and his eyes were wet. "That's why I stood out there this morning. It's been 3 years today." Delilah's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry. I tried to keep the ranch going by myself, hired a few hands, but they never lasted. This land is hard. Most people can't take it." He paused. "When I saw you on that platform, you looked like you understood hard, like you'd been through it and came out the other side still standing." "Barely standing," Delilah said. "Still counts." They sat in silence for a while. Then Delilah asked, "Is that why you bid? Because I reminded you of her?" "No." Boaz shook his head. "You don't remind me of Rachel at all. She was loud and stubborn and always singing, drove me crazy half the time." He almost smiled. "I bid because I needed help, and you needed out. Seemed like it could work for both of us." "Does it?" Delilah asked. "Work, I mean." Boaz looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "I think it does." That night, Delilah lay in bed thinking about Rachel Creed, about a woman who came out to the hard country with her brother and built a life here, about someone who sang and was stubborn and died too young. She thought about the journal entry she'd read. "I want to believe we can build something here that lasts." Rachel hadn't gotten to see if it lasted, but Delilah was here now, wearing her clothes, sleeping in her bed, living in the cabin she'd helped build. She didn't know what that meant. Didn't know if she was meant to replace Rachel or just fill the empty space she'd left behind. But she knew she didn't want to leave. The next morning, Delilah woke to find Boaz already outside, working on the corral fence again. She made coffee, then pulled on her new boots and Rachel's coat and went out to help. Boaz looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know," Delilah said. "Hand me that hammer." He did. They worked together for most of the morning, replacing rotten boards, tightening wire, reinforcing posts. It was hard work, and Delilah's hands got cold despite the gloves Boaz had found for her. But it felt good, felt real. Around midday they heard something, the sound of horses approaching. Boaz straightened, his hand moving automatically to the knife on his belt. "Get inside." "What's wrong?" "Just go." But Delilah didn't move. She watched as 3 riders came into view, following the trail that led up to the ranch. One of them was Marcus Tully. Boaz swore under his breath. "Inside! Now!" This time Delilah went. But she didn't go far, just to the cabin door where she could see and hear what was happening. Marcus and his 2 companions rode right up to where Boaz stood. Marcus's face was swollen on one side, his lips split and scabbed over. "Creed," he said. "Tully, you're on my land. Public trail." "Not this far up, it's not." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I came to apologize." Boaz didn't say anything. "What I said yesterday, in town, that was out of line. I had too much to drink, and I spoke without thinking. I'm sorry. It sounded rehearsed, like someone had told him what to say. Apology noted, Boaz said. Now leave. I also wanted to make you an offer. Marcus leaned forward in his saddle. I'm looking to expand my lumber operation. Need more land. I'm willing to pay fair price for this ranch. It's not for sale. You haven't heard my price yet. Doesn't matter. Not selling. Marcus's smile faded. You sure about that? Because winter's long up here. A lot of things can happen. Accidents, fires, animals getting spooked and running off. Boaz went very still. That a threat? Just an observation? Marcus straightened. You think about it, Creed. Think about whether this land is worth dying for. He turned his horse and rode away, his companions following. Delilah came out of the cabin as soon as they were out of sight. What was that about? Trouble, Boaz said. He was staring after them, his jaw tight. He wants your land? He wants the timber rights. There's good pine on the North Ridge. Worth money if you've got the equipment to log it. Boaz turned to her. He's not going to let this go. What are you going to do? Same thing I've been doing. Keep working. Keep building. Make it too much trouble to force me out. He looked at her. But you should know. It might get dangerous here. If you want to leave, if you want to go back to town, no, Delilah said immediately. You didn't let me finish. I don't need you to finish. I'm not leaving. Boaz studied her face. Why? Because this is the first place I felt like a person instead of a problem in longer than I can remember, Delilah said. Because you treat me like I matter. Because... She stopped, not sure how to put the rest into words. Because what? Because I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting men like Marcus Tully decide what happens to me. Boaz was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. All right, but we do this smart. We prepare. For what? For whatever he tries next. Over the following days, Boaz turned the ranch into something closer to a fortress. He reinforced the barn door with extra beams. He moved the animals closer to the cabin at night. He cleaned and oiled the rifle, then taught Delilah how to load and fire it. I don't want to shoot anyone, she said, holding the heavy weapon awkwardly. Neither do I. But if someone comes at you, you need to be ready. They practiced until Delilah could hit a target at 20 yards. Not perfectly, but well enough. Boaz also started riding the perimeter of his land every morning, checking for signs of intrusion. He found tracks once, boot prints that didn't belong to him, near the North Ridge where the good timber was. They're scouting, he told Delilah. Seeing what's here, how hard it would be to take. How hard would it be? Hard enough, Boaz said, but not impossible. That night, neither of them slept well. Delilah lay in bed listening to every sound, the wind in the trees, the creak of the cabin settling, the distant call of a wolf. She heard Boaz moving in the loft, restless. Around midnight, she heard him climb down the ladder. Can't sleep? She asked quietly. No. He went to the window, looked out at the darkness. You should go back to town. This is my fight, not yours. We already had this conversation. I'm serious, Delilah. Marcus Tully is dangerous. If he decides to come after me, anyone near me is at risk. Delilah sat up. You think I don't know dangerous? You think I haven't been at risk every single day since my husband died? She threw off the blanket. I've been at risk from men who wanted to use me, from creditors who wanted to take what little I had left, from a town that decided I was worthless. At least here, if something bad happens, it'll be while I'm fighting back instead of just taking it. Boaz turned from the window. In the dim light from the dying fire, she could just see his face. You're stubborn, he said. You're one to talk. Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. Then it faded. If you stay, you follow my lead. No arguments. I can agree to that. I mean it. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. And if you're wrong, then you can tell me about it afterward. He came closer, and Delilah could see the worry in his eyes. I can't lose anyone else. You understand? Delilah understood. She understood that he'd lost his parents, lost his sister, lost everything except this hard piece of land. She understood that he was terrified of caring about someone again because everyone he cared about ended up gone. "You're not going to lose me," she said. "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to make sure it doesn't happen." They looked at each other across the small space of the cabin. Then Boaz nodded and went back to the loft. Delilah lay back down, but she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and thought about Marcus Tully's threat, about accidents and fires and animals getting spooked, about the fact that she'd meant what she said. She would fight like hell, because this place, this hard, cold, isolated place, had given her something she'd thought she'd lost forever. It had given her a reason to fight. The attack came on a Tuesday, just before dawn. Delilah woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of animals screaming. She was out of bed before her mind fully caught up, grabbing for the rifle Boaz had insisted she keep within reach. Above her, she heard Boaz curse and scramble down from the loft. "Stay inside," he said, pulling on his boots. "Like hell." He didn't have time to argue. They both ran for the door. The barn was on fire. Not the whole structure yet, just the back corner, but flames were already climbing the dry wood, bright orange, against the pre-dawn darkness. Inside, the horse and mule were panicking, throwing themselves against their stalls. "Get the animals out," Boaz shouted. He was already running toward the barn with a bucket. "I'll fight the fire." Delilah ran after him. The heat hit her face like a physical blow when she got close. Smoke poured out through gaps in the wood, thick and black. She could hear the horse screaming, a sound that made her stomach turn. The barn door was stuck. Someone had wedged it shut from the outside with a thick branch jammed through the handle. Delilah grabbed it and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. "Here." Boaz appeared beside her with an axe. He swung once, twice, and the branch splintered. They yanked the door open and smoke billowed out, choking them both. Delilah pulled her sleeve over her mouth and ran inside. The horse was throwing itself against the stall door, eyes rolling white with terror. She fumbled with the latch, got it open, and the roan charged past her, nearly knocking her down. The mule was calmer, but still spooked. Delilah got that stall open too, and both animals bolted out into the snow. Behind her, she heard Boaz throwing water on the flames. It wasn't enough. There wasn't enough water, wasn't enough time. The fire was spreading too fast. "Get out!" Boaz yelled. "It's gone! Just get out!" Delilah ran. She made it out of the barn just as part of the roof collapsed inward with a shower of sparks. Boaz came staggering after her, his face black with soot, coughing. They stood in the snow and watched the barn burn. There was nothing else they could do. The nearest water source was the creek, partially frozen, too far away to make a difference. All they could do was make sure the fire didn't spread to the cabin or the other outbuildings. It took 2 hours for the barn to burn down completely. By the time the sun came up, all that was left was a smoking skeleton of blackened beams and ash. Boaz stood looking at the ruins, his jaw clenched so tight Delilah could see the muscle jumping. His hands were blistered from the bucket handle, his coat singed, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Marcus Tully," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Delilah looked at the wreckage, at the branch that had been jammed through the door handle, deliberately placed to trap the animals inside. At the way the fire had started in the back corner, away from the main door, giving it time to spread before anyone noticed. This wasn't an accident. This was attempted murder, of the animals, and maybe of them too. "We need to go to the sheriff," Delilah said. "No point." "What do you mean, no point? This is arson. The sheriff is Thomas Brennan's cousin," Boaz said. "And Thomas Brennan works for Marcus Tully's lumber operation. You think he's going to do anything?" Delilah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "So we just let them get away with it?" "No." Boaz turned to her, and his eyes were hard. "We rebuild. We make it clear we're not leaving, and we watch for the next attack because there will be one." "How do you know?" "Because this didn't work. The barn's gone, but we're still here. The animals got out. He wanted to break us, and we're not broken." Boaz looked back at the smoking ruins. "He'll try again. Probably harder next time." They spent the rest of the day salvaging what they could from the barn. Most of the hay was destroyed, burned to ash. Some of the tools had survived, metal warped and handles charred, but usable. Boaz's saddle was gone. So was the tack for the mule, the spare lumber he'd been storing, the winter feed for the animals. The horse and mule had run off during the fire, spooked and terrified. It took Boaz 3 hours of tracking through the snow to find them. The roan had a burn on its flank, painful but not serious. The mule was unharmed but jumpy, flinching at every sound. That night they brought both animals into the cabin. There wasn't room, but Boaz didn't care. He wasn't leaving them outside where someone could get to them. Delilah made dinner while Boaz tended to the horse's burn. They ate in silence, too exhausted and angry to talk. The animals stood near the door, taking up most of the floor space, their presence a constant reminder of what had almost happened. After dinner, Boaz went outside to check the perimeter one more time. Delilah watched him through the window, saw him walk the property line with the rifle in his hands, looking for tracks, for signs of whoever had set the fire. He found nothing. Whoever had done it had been careful. When he came back inside, his face was grim. They knew what they were doing, came in from the north where the ground is rocky. No tracks. What do we do? Sleep in shifts, one of us awake at all times. He looked at her. I'll take first watch. You sleep. I won't be able to. Try anyway, you're going to need the rest. Delilah lay down in the bed, but Boaz was right. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the barn burning, heard the animals screaming, smelled the smoke. She must have dozed off eventually because she woke to Boaz shaking her shoulder gently. Your turn, he said. His voice was rough with exhaustion. Delilah sat up. What time is it? Around midnight. He handed her the rifle. Anything moves out there, you wake me. Don't try to handle it yourself. I know. He climbed up to the loft and was asleep within minutes. Delilah sat at the table with the rifle across her lap and watched the darkness outside the window. The night stretched out endlessly. Every sound made her tense. The wind in the trees, the settling of the cabin, the animals shifting near the door. Once, she heard something that might have been footsteps, but when she looked out, there was nothing but snow and shadows. Dawn came slowly, gray light creeping across the valley. Delilah woke Boaz when the sun cleared the eastern ridge. They both looked like hell. Neither of them had slept more than a few hours. Boaz's eyes were bloodshot, his face drawn. Delilah felt like she was moving through water, everything slow and difficult. We can't keep this up, she said. I know. So what do we do? Boaz was quiet for a long time. Then he said, we go on the offensive. What does that mean? It means we stop waiting for Marcus to make his next move. We make ours first. And what's our move? Boaz looked at her. We go to town. We tell everyone what happened. We make it public. He's counting on us being isolated, on nobody knowing or caring what happens up here. We take that away from him. Delilah thought about Jasper Hollow, about the people who'd watched her being sold, about Martha Yates and Samuel Garrett and all the others who'd made it clear they didn't care what happened to her. You think anyone will listen? She asked. Maybe not, but we make enough noise, it gets harder for him to act. Right now, he can burn us out and nobody will ask questions. But if the whole town knows we're accusing him, if we make it a public fight, he has to be more careful. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. They left for town an hour later. The ride down took longer than usual because the horse was still favoring its burned flank. Delilah could feel the animal's pain in every careful step. When they rode into Jasper Hollow, it was just past noon. The town was busy, women shopping, men working, children playing in the street. Normal life continuing like nothing had happened. Boaz rode straight to the sheriff's office and dismounted. Delilah followed. The sheriff was a man named William Garrett, Samuel's younger brother. He was in his 40s with a gut that spoke to too much sitting and too many free meals. He looked up when they walked in, and his expression soured. Creed, he said, what do you want? To report a crime. Someone burned down my barn last night. William leaned back in his chair. That's so. You see who did it? No, but I know who's responsible. Knowing and proving are different things. Marcus Tully threatened me 4 days ago, said accidents could happen, animals could get spooked. Then last night my barn burns down with the animals trapped inside. You telling me that's a coincidence? William shrugged. Could be. Marcus Tully is a respected businessman. You're a loner who lives in the hills and causes trouble in town. Who should I believe? Delilah felt her temper flare. He's telling the truth. The barn door was wedged shut from the outside. Someone set that fire deliberately. You got proof of that? William asked. The branch that was... Delilah started. Burned up in the fire, I'm guessing, so no proof. Just your word against Marcus Tully's. William stood up. Look, I'm sorry about your barn. I truly am. But unless you got evidence, there's nothing I can do. Could have been lightning. Could have been a spark from your stove. Could have been 100 things. It was arson, Boaz said flatly. Maybe, but I can't arrest a man based on maybe. William walked to the door and opened it. You want my advice? Be more careful with fire. Get yourself a better barn, and stop making enemies of men who have the power to make your life difficult. He already made my life difficult, Boaz said. He tried to kill my animals and burn me out. That's a serious accusation. You sure you want to make it? I'm sure. William sighed. Then I'll have a talk with Marcus. Ask him where he was last night. But I'm telling you right now, he's going to have an alibi, and there won't be a damn thing I can do about it. They left the sheriff's office with nothing. Delilah could feel the anger radiating off Boaz in waves. I told you, he said quietly. There's no help coming. Then what was the point of this? Making noise. Boaz looked around the street. Several people were watching them, curious. Now people know. The sheriff knows. When Marcus tries again, there's a record of us coming here, making the accusation. It won't stop him, but it makes it messier. They walked toward the general store. Delilah didn't want to go inside, didn't want to face Samuel Garrett again, but they needed supplies. The barn fire had destroyed most of their stored food for the animals. Samuel was behind the counter when they walked in. He looked at them with undisguised distaste. Heard you had some trouble, he said. Barn burned down, Boaz said. Need to replace some things. That's unfortunate. Samuel didn't sound like he thought it was unfortunate. He sounded like he thought it was inevitable. What do you need? Boaz gave him a list. Samuel moved around the store pulling items, adding up the cost in his head. When he was done, he said, That'll be $32. Boaz pulled out his money and counted it. Delilah watched his face carefully, saw the tension around his eyes. $32 was a lot, more than he'd planned to spend. He paid. Samuel packed the supplies into sacks without speaking. As they were leaving, Martha Yates came in. She saw them and stopped. Well, she said, I heard about your barn. Such a shame. There was something in her voice, a kind of satisfaction barely hidden under false sympathy. Yes, Delilah said. It is. These things happen, though. Fire is so unpredictable. Martha looked at Boaz. I hope you've learned to be more careful. I'm plenty careful, Boaz said. Well, I'm sure the sheriff will investigate thoroughly. Martha smiled. Though I did hear Marcus Tully was at a card game at the saloon all night last night. Lots of witnesses. So I'm sure he had nothing to do with it. Delilah felt her stomach drop. An alibi. Already established. William Garrett had been right. Convenient, she said. Martha's smile widened. Isn't it? It's almost like someone planned ahead. She looked at Delilah with cold eyes. You should convince your, whatever he is, to accept Marcus's offer. Sell the land while he still can, before something worse happens. Is that a threat? Delilah asked. It's friendly advice from someone who wants to see you both safe. Martha brushed past them toward the counter. Think about it. They loaded the supplies onto the mule and rode out of town. Delilah could feel eyes on them the whole way. People watching from windows, from doorways, from the street. Everyone knew about the fire. Everyone had opinions, and nobody was going to help. On the ride back, Boaz was silent. Delilah could see him thinking, working through possibilities in his head. We could leave, she said finally. Just pack up and go somewhere else. Start over. No. Why not? This land isn't worth dying for. Boaz looked at her and his expression was fierce. Yes, it is. This is my home. Rachel's buried here. My parents gave everything they had to buy this land and get us started. I'm not letting Marcus Tully take it because he's a bully with money and friends in the right places. And you're not leaving either. Delilah blinked. What? You heard me. You're staying. We're both staying. We're fighting. You can't just decide that for me. Then decide it yourself, Boaz said. But decide to stay. Decide to fight. Because I'm not doing this without you. Delilah stared at him. He'd never said anything like that before. Never admitted he needed her, wanted her there, valued her presence. Why? She asked. Because you're the only person I trust, Boaz said simply. Because you're stubborn and brave and you don't quit. Because every time I think about facing this alone, He stopped, shook his head. Just stay. Delilah felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been locked down and protected for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like when it moved. All right, she said. I'll stay. We'll fight. Boaz nodded, and some of the tension left his shoulders. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not empty, but full. Full of things they weren't ready to say out loud yet. When they got back to the ranch, the burned remains of the barn looked even worse in the afternoon light. A pile of charred wood and ash, still smoking faintly. A reminder of what they'd lost and what they stood to lose. Boaz stood looking at it for a long moment. Then he turned to Delilah. We start rebuilding tomorrow, he said. The barn? Everything. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked from sunrise to sunset. Boaz cut new timber from the forest, dragging logs down to the building site with the mule. Delilah helped him strip bark, cut notches, fit beams together. It was brutal work. Her hands blistered and bled. Her back ached constantly. She fell into bed every night so exhausted she could barely move. But the barn started to take shape. Not the same as before. This one was smaller, built closer to the cabin where they could keep an eye on it. But it was solid, functional, built to last. They worked in silence mostly, saving their energy for the physical labor. But sometimes Boaz would tell her things, how to judge the quality of timber, how to cut a proper notch, how to make sure a beam was level. He taught her the way someone teaches a partner, not a helper. Like her opinion mattered, like her work mattered. And slowly, Delilah started to feel like she belonged here. Not just as someone who was allowed to stay, but as someone who was building this place with her own hands, making it hers too. They didn't talk about Marcus Tully or the threat hanging over them, but they both stayed alert. One of them was always watching while the other worked. The rifle was always within reach. They slept in shifts, never both asleep at the same time. It was exhausting, unsustainable. But neither of them knew what else to do. Then, on a cold morning 3 weeks after the fire, a rider came up the trail. Boaz saw him first. He grabbed the rifle and positioned himself between the cabin and the approaching horse. Delilah moved to the doorway, ready to run inside if needed. But as the rider got closer, Boaz relaxed slightly. Heinrich, he said. The cobbler rode into the yard on an old mare that looked as tired as he did. He dismounted stiffly and nodded to Boaz. Came to warn you, he said without preamble. Marcus Tully's been talking. Heard him in the saloon last night. He's planning something. What kind of something? Boaz asked. Don't know exactly. But he was drunk and running his mouth. Said you'd be gone by spring. Said the land would be his and nobody would be able to prove anything. Heinrich looked worried. He's got men working for him who don't ask questions. Men who'd do anything for money. Delilah felt ice in her veins. When? Soon. That's all I know. Maybe a few days, maybe a week. Heinrich pulled an envelope from his coat. I also brought this. It's from the land office. Came for you 2 days ago. Samuel was supposed to deliver it, but he didn't, Boaz finished. He took the envelope and opened it. Delilah watched his face as he read. Saw it go pale, then hard. What is it? She asked. It's a notice of foreclosure, Boaz said. His voice was flat. Says I'm 3 months behind on my land payments. Says if I don't pay the full amount by the end of the month, the property reverts to the territory and can be sold to settle the debt. But that's not true, Delilah said. You own this land outright. You told me, I do own it, or I did. Boaz looked at Heinrich. Who filed this? Don't know. But I can guess. Heinrich's expression was grim. Marcus has friends at the land office. Friends who can file paperwork that looks official even when it's not. So it's fake? Probably. But by the time you prove it's fake, the deadline will have passed. And if you miss the deadline, the seizure becomes legal. Heinrich shook his head. It's a trap. He's trying to force you off the land legally, or force you to leave the ranch to go fight it in the territorial capital, where he can burn the place down while I'm gone, Boaz finished. Exactly. Delilah felt trapped. Every direction they turned, Marcus had already thought 3 steps ahead. The fire, the false accusations, the fake legal documents, all of it designed to box them in, give them no options. There has to be something we can do, she said. Heinrich was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There might be, but you won't like it." "Tell me," Boaz said. "Marcus is powerful because he has friends. The sheriff, the land office, half the businessmen in town. They all owe him favors or fear him." Heinrich looked at Boaz. "But there are people who don't. People who've been hurt by him. People who'd like to see him taken down a peg." "Like who?" "Like the families whose men have been injured or killed working in his lumber camps. Like the merchants he's undercut to drive out of business. Like the widow he's been pressuring to sell her late husband's timber rights." Heinrich paused. "Like me. He owns the building where my shop is. Raised my rent 3 times in the past year, trying to force me out." Boaz was listening carefully now. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you stop fighting this alone. You build alliances. You get people on your side. You make this a public fight that Marcus can't win without showing his true colors to the whole town." "Nobody in that town cares what happens to me," Boaz said. "Maybe not, but they care what happens to them. And if they see Marcus for what he is, a man who'll use violence and fraud to get what he wants, they'll realize they could be next." Delilah looked at Boaz. "He's right. We can't win this alone. We need help." Boaz didn't answer for a long time. She could see him struggling with it. His natural instinct was to handle everything himself, to not ask for help, to not trust anyone. But finally, he nodded. "All right, we try it your way, but I don't even know where to start." "I do," Heinrich said. "There's a woman named Ada Fletcher. Her husband died in one of Marcus's camps last year. Equipment failure that should have been prevented. She's been trying to get compensation, but Marcus has stonewalled her. She'd help if you asked." "And the others?" "There's a shopkeeper named James Worth. Marcus drove him out of business 2 years ago, and he's been bitter ever since. There's the widow I mentioned, Ellen Price. Her husband owned timberland that Marcus wants. He's been harassing her to sell." Heinrich ticked them off on his fingers. "There are others. Not many, but enough. If you can get them together, get them to stand with you, you might have a chance." It wasn't much. A handful of people Marcus had wronged, all of them probably scared, all of them with their own problems. But it was more than nothing. "I'll talk to them," Boaz said. "We'll talk to them," Delilah corrected. Boaz looked at her, started to argue, then stopped. "We'll talk to them." Heinrich stayed for coffee, then rode back to town before dark. He left them with a list of names and where to find them. That night, Delilah and Boaz sat at the table making plans. "We go tomorrow," Boaz said. "Talk to as many of them as we can. See if they're willing to stand with us. And if they're not, then we're back where we started, fighting alone." He looked at her. "You don't have to do this. This fight is mine. If you want to—" "Stop," Delilah said. "Stop trying to give me an out. I'm in this. All the way." "Why?" It was the same question he'd asked before, but this time Delilah had an answer. "Because, for the first time in my life, I'm fighting for something that's mine," she said. "Not something that was my husband's, or my father's, or that I'm supposed to be grateful for. This place, this life, I helped build it, and I'll be damned if I let Marcus Tully take it." Boaz reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough and scarred, but his grip was gentle. "Thank you," he said quietly. Delilah squeezed back. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until we see if this actually works." They sat like that for a moment, hands clasped across the table, the cabin quiet around them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Winter wasn't done with them yet. But for the first time since the barn burned, Delilah felt something other than fear and anger. She felt hope. They rode into Jasper Hollow the next morning under a sky that threatened snow. Delilah could feel the weight of eyes on them from the moment they entered town, the same as always, but this time she didn't look away. She kept her chin up and met those stares with her own. Ada Fletcher lived in a small house on the east side of town, near the creek. The paint was peeling, the front steps sagged, and there was a quality of neglect that spoke to someone barely holding on. Boaz knocked on the door and waited. The woman who answered was younger than Delilah expected, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that had seen too much. She looked at Boaz, then at Delilah, and her expression was wary. "Mrs. Fletcher?" Boaz asked. "Who's asking?" "My name is Boaz Creed. This is Delilah Monroe." Heinrich sent us. Ada's expression softened slightly at Heinrich's name. What do you want? To talk about Marcus Tully. Ada's face went hard. I don't want trouble. Neither do we. But we've got it anyway. Boaz shifted his weight. Can we come in? Just for a few minutes. Ada hesitated, then stepped aside. Make it quick. I've got washing to finish before the snow comes. The inside of the house was clean but sparse. There was a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner. Children's drawings hung on one wall, crude pictures of horses and houses and stick figure families. Your children? Delilah asked, nodding toward the drawings. My son. He's 7. He's at school right now. Ada crossed her arms. What do you want to know about Marcus Tully? Boaz told her about the barn, the threats, the fake foreclosure notice. Ada listened without interrupting, her face growing darker with each detail. Sounds like Marcus, she said when he finished. That's exactly how he operates. Pressure, threaten, use the law when he can, and violence when he can't. She moved to the window, looked out at the gray sky. My husband worked in one of his camps. John was careful, always careful. But the equipment Marcus provided was old, poorly maintained. A cable snapped, and John was... She stopped, swallowed hard. It was quick, at least. That's what they told me. Did you try to get compensation? Delilah asked. Of course I tried. Went to the sheriff, went to the territorial magistrate when he came through. But Marcus had witnesses who swore it was John's fault, said he'd been drinking, which was a lie. John never drank on the job. Ada's voice was bitter. And Marcus owns the sheriff, owns half the businessmen in town. Nobody wanted to help the widow of a dead laborer. We're trying to build a case against him, Boaz said. Get enough people together who he's wronged. Make enough noise that the territorial authorities have to listen. Ada laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think the territorial authorities care? They're even more corrupt than the locals. Maybe, but we have to try. Boaz leaned forward. We can't do it alone. We need people willing to stand up and tell their stories, people willing to testify to what Marcus has done. Testify where? To who? We're still working that out, Delilah admitted. But Heinrich thinks if we can get enough people together, we can force a real investigation. Ada looked at her for a long moment. And what happens when Marcus finds out? When he realizes I'm working against him? He's already won if we let fear stop us, Delilah said. He's counting on all of us being too scared to fight back. Maybe we should be scared. Maybe that's the smart thing. Maybe, Delilah agreed. But I'm tired of being smart. I'm tired of keeping my head down and hoping things get better. They don't get better. Not unless we make them better. Ada studied her face. You're the woman they sold at auction, aren't you? I heard about that. Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks but didn't look away. Yes. And now you're here, trying to take on the most powerful man in the territory. Ada shook her head. That's either brave or stupid. Probably both, Delilah said. Something shifted in Ada's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. All right, I'll help. I'll tell my story, but I can't promise it'll make a difference. It will, Boaz said. Every voice matters. They left Ada's house with one ally. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Next was James Worth. Heinrich had said he ran a small repair shop on the outskirts of town, fixing tools and equipment for farmers and ranchers. They found the shop easily enough, a low building with a crooked sign and smoke coming from a forge inside. James Worth was a compact man in his 50s with arms like tree trunks and a face weathered by years of hard work. He was hammering out a bent plowshare when they walked in, and he didn't stop until he'd finished the piece to his satisfaction. Help you? He asked, setting down his hammer. Boaz introduced them and explained their purpose. James listened, his expression unreadable. Marcus Tully drove me out of business 3 years ago, he said when Boaz finished. I had a shop on Main Street, good location, steady customers. Then Marcus decided he wanted the building, offered me half what it was worth. When I refused, he opened his own repair shop 2 doors down and undercut my prices until I couldn't compete. Had deeper pockets, could afford to lose money until I went under. Did you try to fight it? Delilah asked. How? It's legal to open a competing business. It's legal to charge less. There was nothing illegal about what he did, just ruthless. James picked up another piece of metal, examined it. I lost everything. Had to sell the building to pay my debts. Marcus bought it for even less than his original offer. And nobody helped you? Why would they? Business is business. People liked me, but not enough to pay higher prices out of loyalty. He looked at Boaz. What makes you think this time will be different? Because what he's doing to me isn't just ruthless business. It's arson, fraud, attempted murder. If we can prove it, we can get him arrested. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You got proof of any of that?" "Working on it." "Then come back when you've got it. I'll help if you can actually make a case. But I'm not sticking my neck out based on hope and good intentions. I've been down that road before." They left the shop with a conditional ally. Better than nothing, but not the firm support they needed. Ellen Price was next. She lived in a well-kept house near the church, a 2-story building with white paint and flower boxes that would be full of geraniums come spring. She answered the door herself, a tall woman in her 40s with graying hair and intelligent eyes. "Mrs. Price?" Boaz asked. "Yes." "And you are?" Boaz introduced them. Ellen's eyebrows rose when he mentioned they wanted to talk about Marcus Tully. "Come in," she said. "This isn't a conversation for the street." Her house was comfortable and tastefully furnished. She served them tea in china cups and listened to their story without interrupting. "Marcus has been pressuring me to sell my timber rights for over a year," she said when they finished. "My husband owned 300 acres of prime pine forest north of here. When he died, it came to me. Marcus wants it badly. It would connect 2 of his existing holdings and give him control over the whole northern range." "But you won't sell," Delilah said. "No. Henry loved that land. We used to walk through those woods together, make plans for what we'd do with it someday." Ellen's voice was soft but firm. "I'm not giving it to Marcus Tully, so he can strip it bare and destroy everything Henry loved." "Has he threatened you?" Boaz asked. "Not directly, but he's made it clear that bad things happen to people who don't cooperate. Accidents, fires, legal troubles." She set down her teacup. "I've been expecting him to make a move. So far he's held back, probably because I'm visible in town. I sing in the church choir, I host ladies' gatherings, I have friends. Hurting me would raise questions." "But he won't hold back forever," Delilah said. "No. Eventually he'll decide the risk is worth it." Ellen looked at them steadily. "So yes, I'll help you. I'll testify to the pressure he's put on me. I'll stand with you. But you need to understand something. Marcus Tully doesn't lose. He's too powerful, too connected. If we go after him and fail, he'll destroy all of us." "We know," Boaz said. "Do you?" Ellen's gaze was sharp. "Because I'm not sure you do. This isn't just about your ranch anymore. If we make this public, if we accuse him openly, every person who stands with you becomes a target. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" Delilah felt the weight of that question. Ellen was right. They were asking people to put themselves at risk. If this went wrong, it wouldn't just be Boaz and Delilah who paid the price. "We understand," Delilah said, "and if anyone wants to back out, we won't hold it against them. But we have to try. Because if we don't, Marcus just keeps winning. He keeps hurting people, and it never stops." Ellen studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, count me in." They spent the rest of the day visiting the other names on Heinrich's list. Some agreed to help. Others refused, too afraid or too beaten down to fight back. By the time the sun started to set, they had 5 people willing to stand with them. Ada Fletcher, Ellen Price, a farmer named Robert Chen, whose water rights Marcus had tried to steal, a former lumber camp supervisor named Thomas Green, who'd been fired for reporting safety violations, and Heinrich himself. 6 people total, counting Boaz and Delilah. Not an army, but maybe enough. They gathered that evening at Ellen Price's house. She had the most space and the most respectability, which mattered. Ellen served coffee and bread, and they sat around her dining table like they were planning something ordinary instead of a fight against the most powerful man in the territory. "First things first," Heinrich said. "We need documentation. Every piece of evidence we can gather about what Marcus has done." "I have the foreclosure notice," Boaz said. "It's fake, but proving it's fake will take time." "I have letters," Ellen said. "Marcus has written to me several times with offers for my timber rights. The last one was more threatening than the others. I kept it. I kept records of the safety violations I reported, Thomas Green added. Marcus fired me the day after I filed the report with the Territorial Labor Office. That can't be a coincidence. Ada spoke up quietly. I don't have papers, but I have witnesses. Men who worked in the camp with John. They saw the equipment, knew it was dangerous. They might be willing to talk. That's good, Heinrich said. We need testimony as well as documents. The more evidence we can compile, the stronger our case. Case for what? Robert Chen asked. He was a quiet man who'd barely spoken since they arrived. Who are we presenting this evidence to? That was the question nobody had answered yet. The territorial magistrate comes through in 6 weeks, Ellen said. We could present it to him. He's in Marcus's pocket too, Thomas said. I've seen them drinking together at the saloon. What about the federal marshal? Delilah suggested. Don't they have jurisdiction over territorial disputes? They do, Heinrich said. But getting a federal marshal to investigate would require significant evidence of federal crimes. We'd need to prove fraud, maybe mail fraud if Marcus used the postal service for any of his schemes. The foreclosure notice came through the mail, Boaz said. If we can prove it's fraudulent, that's mail fraud. Heinrich nodded slowly. That could work. It's a federal crime, which puts it under federal jurisdiction. If we can build a solid case, we could request a federal investigation. How long would that take? Ada asked. Months, maybe longer. We don't have months, Boaz said. The foreclosure deadline is in 3 weeks. If I don't contest it before then, I lose the land automatically. Then we need a 2-part strategy, Ellen said. She was clearly used to organizing things, to thinking through complex problems. Short term, we fight the foreclosure notice. Get it dismissed or delayed. Long term, we build the federal case against Marcus. How do we fight the foreclosure? Delilah asked. We need a lawyer, Ellen said. Someone willing to file the paperwork, argue in front of the land office. We can't afford a lawyer, Boaz said flatly. I can, Ellen said. I have money. Henry left me well provided for. I'll hire someone. Boaz shook his head. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. This benefits all of us. If Marcus takes your land, he gets bolder. He comes after the rest of us harder. Ellen's voice was firm. We're in this together now. That means we pool our resources. Boaz looked like he wanted to argue, but Delilah put her hand on his arm. Let her help. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Thank you. They spent the next 2 hours going through everything they knew, building a timeline of Marcus's actions, identifying which crimes they could prove and which were just suspicions. It was meticulous, exhausting work. By the time they finished, it was late. Snow had started falling outside, light flakes that caught the lamplight. We meet again in 3 days, Heinrich said. Same place. Everyone brings whatever evidence they can gather. We finalize the strategy and move forward. People nodded, started gathering their coats. As they were leaving, Ellen pulled Delilah aside. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. Of course. Why are you doing this? You don't have history with Marcus like the rest of us. You could leave, start over somewhere else. Why stay and fight? Delilah thought about the auction platform, about standing there barefoot while the town decided what she was worth, about following Boaz into the unknown because she had no other choice. Because I'm tired of running, she said. I'm tired of being at the mercy of men who think they can take whatever they want. This isn't just about the ranch. It's about whether people like Marcus get to keep winning because the rest of us are too scared to stop them. Ellen nodded slowly. I understand. Just be careful. Marcus is dangerous, and he's not going to take this lying down. I know. They rode back to the ranch through the falling snow. Boaz was quiet, lost in thought. Delilah didn't push him to talk. She knew he was processing everything, weighing risks, considering angles. When they got home, they took care of the animals and went inside. Boaz built up the fire while Delilah made a simple dinner. They ate in their usual silence, but it felt different tonight, heavier. After dinner, Boaz stood at the window looking out at the darkness. I keep thinking about what Ellen said, he said finally, about how everyone who helps us becomes a target. I know. If something happens to them because of me, it won't be because of you, Delilah cut him off. It'll be because of Marcus. Don't take his guilt onto yourself. Boaz turned from the window. You make it sound simple. It is simple. He's the one doing wrong. We're just refusing to let him get away with it. She stood up, crossed to where he stood. Stop trying to carry everything alone. That's not how this works anymore. What do you mean? I mean, we're partners in this, equal partners. You don't make decisions for me, and I don't let you shoulder all the responsibility. She looked up at him. We're in this together, all the way. Boaz looked down at her, and something in his expression softened. When did you get so stubborn? I've always been stubborn. You just didn't notice. I noticed. He reached up, and for a moment Delilah thought he was going to touch her face, but he dropped his hand. I'm going to check the perimeter, make sure nothing's out of place. He grabbed the rifle and went outside. Delilah stood alone in the cabin, her heart beating faster than it should. There had been a moment there, a moment when something could have shifted between them. But Boaz had pulled back, and she didn't know if she was relieved or disappointed. She cleaned up from dinner, banked the fire, got ready for bed. When Boaz came back inside 20 minutes later, everything looked normal, like nothing had almost happened. All clear, he said. Good. He climbed to the loft. Delilah lay down in the bed. They said goodnight, and the cabin fell silent. But Delilah lay awake for a long time, thinking about the way Boaz had looked at her, about the way his hand had almost touched her face, about the fact that somewhere along the way, this had stopped being just about survival and had become something else, something she wasn't ready to name yet. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. They worked on finishing the new barn during the day. It was nearly complete now, just a few more boards to nail down. At night, they went through every scrap of paper Boaz had related to his land ownership, looking for anything that could help fight the foreclosure. On the third day, they rode back to Ellen's house for the second meeting. Everyone was there, and they'd all brought evidence. Ellen had 5 letters from Marcus, each one escalating in tone from polite offers to barely veiled threats. Thomas had a thick file of safety violation reports, along with the termination letter that had fired him the same day he filed his last report. Robert had surveyor's documents showing that the water rights Marcus claimed were rightfully his. Ada had brought 3 men who'd worked in the lumber camp with her husband, rough, nervous men who clearly didn't want to be there but had come anyway out of loyalty to John Fletcher's memory. Heinrich had done something brilliant. He'd gone through the public records at the land office and found a pattern. Over the past 5 years, Marcus had acquired 12 properties through foreclosure or forced sale. In every case, the previous owner had reported threats, accidents, or legal troubles in the months leading up to the sale. It's a pattern of behavior, Heinrich said, spreading the documents across Ellen's table. 1 or 2 could be coincidence. 12 is a strategy. Will this be enough? Boaz asked. For the federal case, maybe? For the foreclosure fight, it's good supporting evidence, but not conclusive. We still need the lawyer. I've retained one, Ellen said. His name is Michael Santos. He's based in Helena, but he's willing to travel here for the hearing. He specializes in land disputes and has a good reputation. When can he get here? Boaz asked. He's coming next week. He'll review the foreclosure notice, file the necessary objections, and represent you at the hearing. How much is this costing you? Boaz asked quietly. Don't worry about that. Ellen, I said don't worry about it. If we win, you can pay me back. If we lose, she shrugged, then money won't matter anyway. The meeting broke up late. As people were leaving, Ada pulled Delilah aside. I wanted to thank you, she said. For what? For starting this. For refusing to just accept what Marcus tried to do. Ada glanced at her son's drawings on the wall. I have a boy to raise. I don't want him growing up in a world where men like Marcus Tully always win. We haven't won yet, Delilah said. No, but we're fighting. That's more than we were doing before. On the ride home, snow started falling again, heavier this time. Boaz hunched against the wind, guiding the horse carefully on the icy trail. Delilah pressed close to his back for warmth. They were almost home when Boaz suddenly pulled the horse to a stop. What is it? Delilah asked. Look. She followed his gaze. In the distance, she could see an orange glow against the dark sky. Too bright to be a lamp, too contained to be natural. Fire, Boaz said. His voice was tight. He kicked the horse into a gallop. They covered the last mile in minutes that felt like hours. As they crested the final ridge, Delilah saw what was burning. Not the new barn, not the cabin, the forest. A section of trees on the northern edge of the property was ablaze. flames climbing the pines and spreading through the dry undergrowth despite the snow. It was already a substantial fire, probably burning for an hour or more before they'd noticed it. Boaz dismounted and ran toward the fire. Delilah followed, her mind racing. They didn't have enough water to fight this. The creek was too far away, and even if they could reach it, a few buckets wouldn't stop a forest fire. "We need to make a fire break," Boaz shouted over the roar of the flames. "Cut down the trees between the fire and the cabin. Stop it from spreading." They worked frantically, Boaz with the axe and Delilah dragging cut branches away from the fire line. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. Sparks flew everywhere, landing on their clothes and hair. Delilah's eyes streamed tears, her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. They worked for hours. At some point, the snow intensified, heavy, wet flakes that helped slow the fire's spread. That, combined with the fire break they'd created, finally contained it. By the time the danger passed, it was nearly dawn. They stood in the snow, covered in soot and ash, watching the last flames die down to embers. Boaz was shaking with exhaustion and rage. "He did this. Marcus did this." "Can we prove it?" "No, same as before. He'll have an alibi. His men will be long gone." Boaz looked at the burned section of forest, maybe 2 acres of blackened trees. This was a warning. Next time it won't be a warning. They went back to this cabin. Neither of them had the energy to do anything but collapse. Delilah fell into bed fully clothed. Boaz didn't even make it to the loft. He just lay down on the floor near the fire and was asleep within seconds. Delilah woke a few hours later to find pale sunlight streaming through the windows, and Boaz already up, staring at the burned forest through the window. "We can't keep doing this," he said without turning around. "He's escalating. The barn, the foreclosure notice, now the forest. He's not going to stop until we're gone or dead." Delilah sat up. "So what do you want to do?" "I don't know." He sounded defeated in a way she'd never heard before. "Maybe Ellen was right. Maybe this is too dangerous. Maybe we should—" "Don't," Delilah said sharply. "Don't you dare give up now." "I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic." "You're being scared. There's a difference." She got out of bed, walked over to him. "You told me to stay. You told me to fight. You said you needed me here. Did you mean any of that?" "Of course I meant it." "Then act like it. Stop trying to protect me by pushing me away. Stop second-guessing every decision we've made. We have allies now. We have a plan. We're not alone anymore." Boaz finally turned to look at her. "What if it's not enough? What if we do everything right and still lose?" "Then we lose knowing we fought back. Knowing we didn't just roll over and let him win." Delilah met his eyes. "I'd rather die fighting than live on my knees. Wouldn't you?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Yes." "Then we keep going." Boaz reached out and took her hand. His grip was tight, almost desperate. "I can't lose you too." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. "You won't," Delilah said, even though she knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. They stood like that for a moment, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. Then Boaz let go and turned back to the window. "We document the fire, take photographs if we can borrow a camera, add it to the evidence pile, and we prepare for whatever he tries next." Agreed. They spent the day documenting the damage, riding into town to report the fire to the sheriff, who predictably suggested it was probably caused by lightning, and checking in with their allies to let them know what had happened. The lawyer, Michael Santos, arrived the following week. He was a small man with sharp eyes and a mind that worked faster than anyone Delilah had ever met. He reviewed the foreclosure notice, asked 100 questions, and declared it obviously fraudulent. "The land office will have to dismiss this," he said confidently. "The signature is forged, the filing dates don't match up, and there's no record of missed payments. Whoever filed this did a sloppy job." "Can you prove it's Marcus Tully who filed it?" Boaz asked. "Not directly, but I can prove it's fraud, and that's enough to get it thrown out." Michael gathered his papers. "The hearing is set for next week. I'll handle everything. You just show up and tell the truth." The week crawled by. Every night, Delilah and Boaz took turns keeping watch. Every morning, they checked for signs of new sabotage. But Marcus stayed quiet, which somehow felt more ominous than action. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. They rode to the territorial land office in Helena, a 2-day journey that left them exhausted. The hearing was held in a small room with a clerk, a representative from the territorial government, Michael Santos, and Boaz and Delilah. Marcus Tully wasn't there. He'd sent a representative instead, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who claimed to represent the party that had filed the foreclosure notice. The hearing took less than an hour. Michael presented the evidence of fraud. The representative tried to argue procedural points but clearly had no real defense. The territorial official looked bored and annoyed. "The foreclosure notice is dismissed," he said finally. "The land remains in Mr. Creed's possession. Next case." Just like that, it was over. They walked out of the building into cold sunlight. Boaz looked stunned. "We won," he said. "We won this round," Michael corrected. "But Mr. Tully will try again. Men like him always do." "Let him try," Delilah said. "We'll be ready." They paid Michael his fee. Ellen had fronted the money, but Boaz insisted on paying her back in installments and started the long ride home. Halfway back, Boaz stopped the horse and turned to look at Delilah. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. On this." He gestured vaguely at the land around them. "I would have quit if you hadn't pushed me to keep going." "No, you wouldn't have. You're too stubborn." "Maybe, but I would have been alone, and that would have been worse." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and when they finally saw the ranch spread out below them, the rebuilt barn, the cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, the burned forest slowly being reclaimed by snow, Delilah felt something settle in her chest. This was home. Not because it was perfect, not because it was safe, but because it was theirs, and they'd fought for it together. And that made all the difference. The victory at the land office bought them 2 weeks of uneasy peace. 2 weeks where Boaz and Delilah worked on the ranch, finished the barn, and waited for Marcus Tully's next move. It came on a gray afternoon in late March, when the snow was finally starting to melt, and the first hints of spring were pushing through the frozen ground. Delilah was in the cabin making bread when she heard horses. Multiple horses. She looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. Marcus Tully was riding up to the ranch with 6 men behind him, all of them armed. "Boaz," she called. He was outside working on the corral. He looked up, saw the riders, and his hand went immediately to the knife at his belt. Then he seemed to think better of it and walked toward the cabin, putting himself between the approaching men and Delilah. Marcus dismounted when he was still 20 feet away. His face was bruised on one side. Boaz's punch from months ago had healed, but there was fresh damage, like he'd been in another fight recently. His eyes were cold and calculating. "Creed," he said, "we need to talk." "Then talk. You're on my land, so make it quick." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I came to make you one final offer. I'll pay you $3,000 for this property. That's more than fair. More than it's worth, honestly. It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale. It's just a matter of price." Marcus looked around at the ranch, the rebuilt barn, the cabin, the land stretching out toward the mountains. "You've done good work here. I can respect that. But you're fighting a losing battle. The foreclosure notice didn't work, fine, but there are other ways. Legal ways. I can tie you up in court for years, cost you more money than you'll ever have. Or," he paused, let the word hang. "Things can get dangerous up here. Accidents happen. People get hurt. Sometimes they don't recover." "Is that a threat?" Boaz asked quietly. "It's a statement of fact." Marcus's smile widened. "Take the money, Creed. Walk away. Find another piece of land somewhere else. Nobody has to get hurt." Delilah stepped out of the cabin. She'd grabbed the rifle on her way, and now she held it loosely at her side. Not aimed at anyone, but present. Marcus's eyes flicked to her, and something ugly crossed his face. "Still playing house with the auction whore, I see." Boaz took a step forward, but Delilah spoke first. "I've been called worse by better men," she said. Her voice was steady. "And I'm still here, still standing. That must drive you crazy, doesn't it? That you can't break us." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You think you're clever. You think bringing in that lawyer, getting your little group of malcontents together, makes you powerful. But you're nothing. You're a widow nobody wanted and a hermit nobody likes. The only reason you're still alive is because I've been patient." "Your patience is running out?" Delilah asked. "Good. We're tired of waiting for you to make your next move. Delilah, Boaz said quietly. A warning, but she ignored him. She was done being careful, done being afraid. You want this land? She said to Marcus. Come and take it. Stop hiding behind your money and your hired men and your fake legal documents. Stop burning barns in the middle of the night like a coward. If you're so powerful, prove it. Marcus's face went red. You don't know who you're dealing with. Yes, I do. You're a bully. And like all bullies, you fold when someone finally stands up to you. For a moment, Delilah thought Marcus was going to do something violent. His hand moved toward the gun at his hip, and the men behind him tensed. But then a voice called out from the trail. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Everyone turned. Coming up the trail were Heinrich, Ellen Price, Thomas Green, and Robert Chen. Behind them were at least a dozen other people. Some Delilah recognized from town, others she'd never seen before. And at the front, wearing a federal marshal's badge, was a tall man with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen everything. Marshal Davis, the man said, introducing himself. I'm here investigating reports of arson, fraud, and intimidation in this territory. He looked at Marcus. Mr. Tully, I believe. We've been wanting to talk to you. Marcus's face went carefully blank. Marshal, I wasn't aware the federal government had taken an interest in local land disputes. It's not the land dispute that interests us. It's the pattern of criminal behavior. Marshal Davis pulled out a document from his coat. We have 17 sworn statements from people you've threatened, defrauded, or harmed. We have evidence of mail fraud, arson, and conspiracy. And we have 3 witnesses willing to testify that you ordered the burning of Mr. Creed's barn. Witnesses can be mistaken, Marcus said smoothly, or paid to lie. These witnesses are your own men, former employees who got tired of being accessories to felonies. The marshal's voice was flat. You're under arrest, Mr. Tully. You and anyone who rode up here with you today. For a moment, nobody moved. Marcus looked at his 6 men, and Delilah could see him calculating odds. Could they fight their way out? Could they run? But the marshal had brought deputies, and they were armed and ready. The math didn't work in Marcus's favor. This is a mistake, Marcus said. I have lawyers. I have friends in the territorial government. Then you'll want to contact them from jail, Marshal Davis said. He nodded to his deputies. Take them. The deputies moved forward. Marcus's men surrendered without a fight. They were hired hands, not loyal soldiers. Marcus himself stood rigid as they put irons on his wrists, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. As they led him past Boaz and Delilah, Marcus stopped. This isn't over. You hear me? I have resources. I'll be out in a week. Maybe, Delilah said, but we'll still be here. And next time you come for us, we'll have even more people standing with us. How many times do you want to lose before you figure out you can't win? Marcus didn't answer. The deputies led him away. When they were gone, Marshal Davis approached Boaz and Delilah. I want to thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. Your documentation and testimony were instrumental in building this case. We didn't do it alone, Boaz said, nodding toward Heinrich and the others. They did most of the work. Everyone did their part. That's how justice works when it actually works. The marshal tipped his hat. I'll need formal statements from both of you, but that can wait a few days. You've earned a rest. He rode off with his prisoners and deputies, leaving Boaz and Delilah standing in front of their cabin with their small group of allies. Ellen Price came forward and hugged Delilah, which surprised her so much she almost dropped the rifle. You were magnificent, Ellen said. The way you stood up to him. I've never seen anything like it. I was terrified, Delilah admitted. That's what made it brave. Heinrich shook Boaz's hand. It's done. Marcus Tully is finished in this territory. Even if he beats some of the charges, his reputation is destroyed. Nobody will work with him. Nobody will trust him. What about his lumber operation? Boaz asked. His men, his equipment, all of that doesn't just disappear. His business partners will carve it up among themselves. That's how these things work. The empire falls apart without the emperor. Heinrich smiled. You're safe now, both of you. The group stayed for a while, celebrating in their quiet way with coffee and the bread Delilah had been making when Marcus arrived. They told stories, compared notes on the investigation, and marveled at how close everything had come to disaster. As the sun started to set, people began to leave. Ellen was the last to go, and she pulled Delilah aside before mounting her horse. You know what I admired most about what you did today? she asked. What? You didn't ask permission. You didn't wait for the men to handle it. You just stepped up and spoke your truth. Ellen squeezed Delilah's hand. You've come a long way from that auction platform. Delilah thought about that. About standing barefoot in the cold while a town decided her value. About following a stranger into the mountains because she had no other choice. About learning that sometimes the only way to survive is to stop accepting what other people say you're worth and start deciding for yourself. I had help, she said. We all do. But you had to choose to accept it. That's the hard part. When everyone was gone, Boaz and Delilah stood together in the yard, watching the last light fade from the sky. The mountains were turning purple in the distance, and the first stars were appearing overhead. It's really over, Boaz said. He sounded like he couldn't quite believe it. Yes. I keep waiting for something else to go wrong. Me too. Delilah looked at the ranch, at everything they'd built and defended and nearly lost. But maybe we can stop waiting now. Maybe we can just live. Boaz turned to look at her. What does that mean? Just living? I don't know. I've never really done it before. She met his eyes. I've survived. I've endured. I've gotten through day after day. But actually living, choosing what I want instead of just taking what I'm given, that's new. What do you want? Boaz asked quietly. It was the question she'd been avoiding for months. The question that terrified her more than Marcus Tully ever had. I want to stay here, she said. Not because I have nowhere else to go. Not because you bought me or I owe you, but because this place feels like mine. Because working this land means something. Because when I wake up in the morning, I have a reason to get out of bed that's about more than just surviving another day. Boaz was watching her carefully. Is that all you want? Delilah's heart was pounding. They'd been circling this conversation for months, maybe longer. Every almost touch, every shared silence, every moment when their eyes met and held for just a second too long. No, she said. It's not all I want. What else? She took a breath. This was harder than facing down Marcus. Harder than anything she'd ever done. I want you to stop sleeping in that damn loft like you're a guest in your own home. I want you to stop treating me like I'm made of glass that might shatter if you get too close. I want... She stopped, frustrated with herself. I'm not good at this, at saying what I feel. Neither am I, Boaz said. But I'll try if you will. He stepped closer, close enough that Delilah could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to count the gray hairs mixed into his beard. I bought you at that auction because I needed help, he said. That's true, but I kept you here. I fought for you. I stood beside you. That wasn't about need. That was about want. About choosing you every single day because you're the strongest, most stubborn, most incredible person I've ever known. Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. I'm not incredible. I'm a mess. I'm angry and scared and I don't know how to trust people anymore. I know. So am I. Boaz reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face. His hand was warm and rough and gentle. Maybe we can be messes together. Maybe that's enough. Is it? Delilah asked. Enough, I mean. After everything we've been through, after all the ways the world has tried to break us, is just being together enough? I think it might be the only thing that matters. Delilah closed the distance between them and kissed him. It wasn't graceful or practiced. Their noses bumped, and she had to tilt her head to make it work. But it was real and warm, and it tasted like coffee and hope. When they pulled apart, Boaz was smiling, actually smiling, which Delilah wasn't sure she'd ever seen before. Took us long enough, he said. We're slow learners. They went inside as full darkness fell. Boaz built up the fire while Delilah finished making dinner. They ate together, but this time the silence felt different, comfortable, full of possibility instead of just absence. After dinner, Boaz looked at the loft, then at Delilah. I'm not sleeping up there tonight, he said. Good. That's a terrible bed anyway. Where should I sleep? Delilah felt her face heat, but she met his eyes. Where do you want to sleep? With you, if that's all right. It's more than all right. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch, Delilah didn't sleep alone. Boaz lay beside her, one arm wrapped around her waist. his breathing deep and even. It should have felt strange, should have felt awkward, but instead it felt like something clicking into place, like a question being answered that she hadn't known how to ask. Spring came slowly to the high country. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass that would turn green in time. The creek swelled with runoff, running fast and cold. Birds returned from wherever they'd spent the winter, filling the mornings with song. Delilah and Boaz worked the ranch together, true partners now in every sense. They planted a garden where the burned forest had been, turning destruction into something that could grow. They repaired the fence line and built a chicken coop and talked about getting a milk cow come summer. The federal case against Marcus Tully moved forward. He was convicted on 3 counts of mail fraud and 2 counts of arson. His lumber empire was broken up and sold off to pay his debts and restitution to the people he'd harmed. He went to prison for 15 years, and the territory breathed a little easier without him. Ada Fletcher used her portion of the restitution money to open a boarding house that was actually respectable, where women could work and live safely. Thomas Green became a safety inspector for lumber operations, making sure what happened to John Fletcher didn't happen to anyone else. Robert Chen bought back his water rights and expanded his farm. Ellen Price kept her timberland and eventually sold the rights to a sustainable logging operation that treated the forest with respect instead of greed. Heinrich stayed in his shop, fixing things that were broken and quietly helping people who needed it. He and Boaz became real friends, the kind who visited each other without needing a reason beyond wanting the company. As for Delilah and Boaz, they built a life that looked nothing like what either of them had imagined. There was no grand romance, no dramatic declarations. Just the steady accumulation of small moments, morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, hands touching as they worked side by side, quiet conversations in the dark before sleep. On a warm evening in June, Boaz took Delilah up to the ridge where his sister Rachel was buried. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the whole valley spread out below them like a promise. "I come up here sometimes," Boaz said, "to talk to her. To tell her about what's happening in my life." "What do you tell her?" "That I'm not alone anymore. That I found someone who makes the hard days bearable and the good days better." He looked at Delilah. "That I'm happy. Really happy, for the first time since she died." Delilah felt tears on her cheeks. "She'd be glad. That you're happy. I think she'd like you. You're both stubborn and loud when you need to be." "I'm not loud." "You faced down Marcus Tully with a rifle and told him to come take our land if he was brave enough. That's pretty loud." Delilah laughed despite the tears. "Okay, maybe I'm a little loud." Boaz pulled something from his pocket, a simple ring, gold worn thin with age. "This was my mother's. Rachel was supposed to have it, but she died before she could marry. I think she'd want you to have it." Delilah stared at the ring. "Boaz? I'm not good with words. You know that. But I want you to know that you're not here because I bought you or because you had nowhere else to go. You're here because I choose you. Every day, I choose you. And if you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life choosing you." It wasn't a traditional proposal. There was no kneeling, no flowery speech. Just Boaz standing on a ridge at sunset, offering her a worn gold ring and a future that was theirs to build together. "Yes," Delilah said. "Yes, I'll have you. I choose you too." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. They were married in late summer by a traveling preacher who came through the territory. The ceremony was small, just their group of allies and a few neighbors who'd become friends. Ellen cried. Heinrich gave a toast that was surprisingly eloquent. Ada brought her son, who asked if this meant Boaz and Delilah were going to have babies, which made everyone laugh. The reception was held at the ranch with tables set up in the yard and food that everyone had contributed. It wasn't fancy or elegant. The bread was slightly burned, the stew was too salty, and halfway through the dancing it started to rain, sending everyone scrambling for cover. But Delilah stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching people laugh and eat and celebrate, and felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Boaz came up behind her, put his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" "That I was sold for $17.50, and I thought that was my value. That's what I was worth." "And now? Now I know that worth isn't something someone else gets to decide. It's not a price at an auction or a number in a ledger. It's what you believe about yourself, what you're willing to fight for. She turned in his arms to face him. I'm worth fighting for. This life is worth fighting for. And I'll never forget that again. Good, Boaz said, because I plan to remind you every day for the rest of our lives. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had started, and someone called for more music. The celebration continued into the night, with dancing and singing and the kind of laughter that comes from people who've survived something hard together and come out the other side. As the stars appeared overhead, Delilah looked around at the life she'd built, at the ranch that was hers, at the husband who was her partner in every sense of the word, at the friends who'd stood with her when it mattered most. She thought about the woman she'd been on that auction platform, broken, desperate, convinced she was worthless. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that the measure of a person isn't what they're sold for, but what they refuse to be bought away from. She'd been reduced to nothing and had built herself back into something that mattered, not because someone gave her value, but because she'd claimed it for herself. And that, Delilah thought, as Boaz spun her around in an impromptu dance while their friends cheered, was worth more than all the gold in the world. The first snow came early that year, in October instead of November. Delilah woke to find the world transformed, everything covered in a blanket of white that sparkled in the morning sun. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to Boaz's steady breathing beside her, feeling the weight of the quilt Rachel had made years ago, looking at the cabin that had become her home. This was her life now. Not perfect, not easy, but hers. Chosen and fought for and built with her own hands. She got up carefully, trying not to wake Boaz, and went to the window. The ranch looked peaceful in the snow. The barn stood solid and strong. The garden beds were covered until spring. The mountains rose in the distance, eternal and unchanging, and Delilah realized something that made her smile. She wasn't afraid anymore, not of winter, not of hardship, not of what tomorrow might bring. She'd learned that she was strong enough to face whatever came. Strong enough to fight when she needed to fight, to ask for help when she needed help, to stand up and say no more when the world tried to push her down. That was the real victory. Not defeating Marcus Tully, not winning the legal battles, not even finding love in the last place she expected it. The real victory was learning that she deserved all of it. The love, the home, the life she wanted. That she'd always deserved it, even when the world tried to tell her otherwise. Boaz stirred behind her. "Come back to bed," he mumbled. "It's cold." Delilah smiled and returned to the warmth of the quilts, to the warmth of her husband's arms, to the warmth of a life that was finally truly hers. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the scars and the struggles and the hard-won victories in a clean white blanket. But underneath, the land remained, strong and enduring and ready for whatever came next, just like Delilah herself. She'd been sold for $17.50 on the coldest day of winter, and she'd thought that was the end of her story. But it had only been the beginning.